Hey folks. So this is going to be just a quick example of how you might go through and run kind of a territory build using some clustering in Tableau to create sales territories, right? Nice way about doing this is it uses Tableau, which is something you've likely already got as an analyst. You can use our free clustering tool that we've built, and then you can go ahead and manage that whole territory creation and kind of stage up the data nicely for export out to Salesforce or your preferred CRM platform after the fact. So I'm just going to show you here using the example data set that we're going to link what we might have and how that's going to look like. You've probably got a data set that's got a postal code, a state, index. This is kind of whatever you're balancing those territories based on. A lot of companies, this could be a combination of stuff like ARR, leads, number of customers, generally kind of a composite that's meant to reflect the general quality of a given postal code. I'm going to do a follow-up video talking about how you might validate and run through your index and how you're going to kind of create that as your individual, organization, right? And what makes sense for you. And we've got a latitude and longitude for each postal code. This is needed to run the clustering tool. I also have a link for how you can get that for most of North America, right? So we got this in here, and in theory, right, we could build territories just off of that if we were able to do something entirely based on the state, right? We could go and we could kind of balance based on index, from state to state. So now here's something interesting that Tableau will do to you sometimes, where it's showing that I have a zero index across everywhere. That is because Tableau has decided to import these as a whole, when in fact it's a decimal. So if we go ahead and we fix that and we go back, now we see what our data actually looks like here. So from here, like I said, if I was doing a smaller sales territory group, I needed just to do, 3 or 4 territories, I could do this probably by state. I'd probably be fine. But if I was a large organization or larger segment in an organization, I might have, 12, 30, 50 salespeople in this geography, and that becomes a little bit tricky because it's not really, states don't give us enough, small enough unit in order to balance that, but postal codes don't really give us a lot of help either, because if we start going down to postal code level of detail, this becomes, oop. So the other thing we got to do here is we got to tell Tableau, hey, this is a postal code. So if we go ahead and we add in that postal code level of detail now, boy, you're going to be spending a lot of time allocating 40,955 postal codes. So that's where that postal code clustering piece comes in to kind of hit that middle ground when I don't really need to hand allocate every single postal code in the United States, but I also need to do more than just, give whole ownership of whole states. So we'll go ahead and fire up that tool here in a second, which we've just recently put into a web app. All right, so now we're at the page for this web app here. So rather than trying to remember this URL, I've got a link to the description. You can go ahead and load that up. It's free to use. We don't retain any data. Just kind of a nice thing that I like to provide for folks. So we go ahead and browse those files. We're going to find that same one that we just put into Tableau to preview. And this is a file that's coming out of the GitHub repo here. It's just in a test folder under Python called example input cluster. So we're going to go ahead and put that in there. It's going to go ahead and just kind of validate that data is correct. You do want to make sure that column headers, they need to be postal, state, latitude, longitude, and index, right? If you're outside the US, consider state to be like province or administrative unit, right? There's no real like hard-coded geographic logic in there. It's just used as a subunit, if you will. So we go through there, we can see our index is largely clustered around 0, which makes sense. This is probably like an SMB type of data set is what it's supposed to be as an example. So we're going to look at the number of territories we want to have in our output. So in this situation, let's say we're going to do, maybe 12 salespeople across the US, and we're going to give them each 2 territories. All right, so we'd maybe say 24 territories, and then clusters per territory. That kind of depends on if you have a lot of really large, like basically how balanced your index or whatever variable is that you're trying to you're trying to kind of balance territories on, right? So for example, if I had a situation where I had 30 or 40 really large postal codes, and then the rest of them were, very small, I was getting like no business out of them, I might do fewer clusters. If I had a more balanced situation, I might do more clusters. So, I think about 8 is probably good there. We'll go ahead and cluster. All right, it goes pretty quickly. We'll download that clustered data, and we can go ahead and just put it on our desktop, clustered output. We'll save it, and then we'll head on to the next step, which will be putting it into Tableau and then building our sales territories. All right, so now we've got our data that we downloaded from the clustering tool. We've loaded it into Tableau, and we're going to need to do a couple of housekeeping things here real quick, just to get us set up properly, right? Like one is we want to make sure that Tableau understands like, hey, postal, that's a string. In fact, we're going to go ahead and turn that into a geographic piece here and right this spot. Index, that's great. Now it knows, recognizing it as a double now. Latitude and longitude, right? Those are geographic. Cluster name is a string. Perfect. Great. We aren't going to need that number of territories field in here. So one thing about that tool is whatever other rows you feed into that clustering tool, the clustering tool is just going to ignore it, and this is going to put them right back out with your data. So it doesn't want to touch them. It will just go ahead and leave them intact and return them back to you. So if you have other kind of identifying keys you want to put in there or other things, that's fine. It'll just kind of leave it be. Right. So now we're going to go to our sheet. So one of the things we want to do is we want to help it understand this kind of geographic hierarchy here, which is state postal. And then because we know our clusters here, if we go back to our data source, right, you can see we've got these cluster names, AK0.2, AK0.1. So the cluster tool as a rule makes at least two clusters per state, just to make things a little bit easier to handle. So we know that that cluster name piece is going to be in between state and postal. And we'll go ahead and say that we're going to create its geographic role from the postal code. Right. So now what you can see here, when we go in, we put our states in, and we can do it as kind of a filled, or what, if you're a cartographer, chloropleth map would be what you'd call it. So we got our state in there, and now we can go down, and we can see this cluster piece. Now, sometimes I'm using Tableau on a Mac, and I've noticed it's takes a little longer to do some of this geographic computation than the PC version. Not entirely sure why, but it is what it is. So here we go. Now you'll see if we zoom in, we've got our states, but we've got a lot of these broken up, right? And kind of typically what you'll see here is, if we add index at the tooltip, we've got some interesting divisions here where these are typically states where there's not a huge amount of SMB business in our test set anyway. Right now we go into California, and we can see that California has got some pretty high index ones, and we've kind of chunked up California, Texas, the Chicagoland area, all these spots. Okay. So now this is where I think I said we're going to do 12 account executive territories, right? If we look down here in the bottom left, we've got 29,063 points of index. Right. So usually what I will do is we're just going to go ahead and do a little bit of calculator math on here, where we say 29,063 divided by 12. I'm doing this here on my phone. We've got 2,000, and I like to put this just in the title, points of index per AE. And then in case we're doing 2 territories per AE, this just gives us a little more flexibility if we need to split, do some replanning, whatever it might be. It gives us a hope that we will not have to do an entire mid-year replan or total reconfiguration of everything. So if we take that, we divide that by 2, right, we're going to end up with, say, 1,210 index per territory. So that's going to just kind of help us keep track there of what our goals are. And so now, let's see here, if we can figure out, let's do 2 regions. We'll do 6 account executives in each region, right? Obviously, this would be a much more thoughtful process if we were doing this in real life. But we know 29,063 divided by 2, we're going to have around 14,000, 530 index per half of the country. So we're going to go ahead and we're just going to, like I say, this would, in real life be a much more nuanced conversation, and we wouldn't just sort of wand over geographies until we got a number we liked. But for the sake of a demo where we're focusing more on the tool, we will go ahead and pretend it is that simple. So we can see we're about getting very close. We don't want to, ideally, we don't want to split up states. So 12,619, we can go ahead and give back Louisiana. This is going to be pretty good here, right? We got 12,528. Our target's 14,000 actually. So we want to go back, do a little more. We may need to take Illinois. We can go ahead and Michigan. So there we go. So we got 14,284, which is going to be pretty close to half. Oh, and we missed part of California there. And in this situation, we have Alaska and Hawaii worth 0 just because it helps make our visualization a little cleaner for the demo piece. All right. So now that we've got our tentative West region here all set up and ready to go in Tableau, we're going to go ahead and make sure we're going to want to create a set. We could create a group, but sometimes that creates conflicts with how we're going to want to create our group territories in the next piece, right? In this case, a set makes more sense because what we want to do is make sure that we're assigning a territory name to each group we're going to create, and then we can stage that appropriately for our export to load into whatever CRM we want to use, right? So we'll go ahead and create our set here for West Territories. Then what I like to do is I like to create a duplicate tab. And here we can call this like main. Then we can call this West Territories. And we'll use that West Territories set as a filter. Always want to filter whenever you can, makes things cleaner, speeds up Tableau, sets particularly fast to filter on, which is always nice to have. All right, so now we see we got 1,210 index per territory. We want to create 12 territories in the West for 6 account executives. General rule of thumb is sort of plus or minus 5% per territory is a good margin of error because we're never going to have things line up absolutely perfectly within our territory. So I call that kind of our target index. And I like to have it up here because that kind of keeps everything all heads up. If you've got it on paper, if you've got it in another app, you're kind of doing a lot of context switching here. It's all kind of right in the flow, which is where we want to be. One thing you do want to watch out for is if you're consistently missing low or high, right, that error kind of builds up. And then when you've got to your last territory, you end up with either some sort of really large or really small territory. So you got to kind of just be mindful of that as you're moving through the process. Right, so we got our 1160 to 1260 in here. So what we want to do, I always like to, you're never, say, as I said before, you're probably never going to hit it exactly on the head. So it's sometimes better to miss a little bit low in fast growing urban areas. Your Seattle, your Bay Area, New York, if you're at New York, Austin, if you're in the tech world, those would all be good choices to miss a little low in. If you're going to go kind of come in a little high on some territories, areas experiencing a little less economic growth tend to kind of even it out a little bit. So we're going to group by cluster name here, and we have created our first group. So one of the easiest ways to kind of keep track of this is in this view, I'll like to keep only the others. So we'll add that to our filter. So once we've allocated a cluster to a territory, we don't see it again. Now the next piece that I'll like to do is I'll go ahead and create kind of a little tracking dashboard in here. So the way that I'll do that, we'll put a cluster name group in here. So I will go ahead and have our cluster name, and then I will have our index. And that way we can just kind of see where we end up at. So there we go. We'll call this West Balance Tracking. So now we will just go through, and we created one, which means that we've got 11 more to go. So I'll do a couple more, and then we'll kind of fast forward for the sake of brevity in everybody's time. All right, and we're back. Okay, so hopefully we won't have any more instability. I will say that I have noticed that in this particular version of Tableau Public, which I'm using, just kind of trying to show exactly what you could do here for basically no cost, right? What would be the absolute sort of cheapest, easiest way you could do this with not buying anything would be using Tableau Public. So we have 2024.2.2 is what I'm on, and I have noticed some instability with some of the mapping stuff, which I've never experienced on the PC versions of this. So hopefully folks manage to get that resolved here sooner rather than later would be great. So what I want to show is it's pretty easy to go ahead and kind of capture these big swaths where there's, what I call like a low index area. I don't think you guys need any help demoing that piece of it. I imagine most folks are pretty well got that handled, right? So let's go to something that's a little bit more complicated, somewhere like we'll go ahead and say, greater LA area. So one thing sometimes helpful is just to add a little index label in there so we can kind of see what we've got going on. And then I usually like to kind of start from the center and work my way out, or we can do kind of like a pie shape, right? And this is getting into a little bit more of like, the art and design of building sales territories, right? So what you don't want to do is give somebody the whole LA area, and then someone's got like kind of all the area around LA where there's nothing, not a lot of real quality territory there. So we want to avoid that type of scenario. So we're going to try to get something a little better in here, if possible. So we're at, I'm looking down here again at the kind of tracking that index piece. So it looks like we have 1,048, 1,289. All right, 1,196 is probably pretty good for that particular territory. So we'll go ahead and add that to a group, and then we'll see that disappear, right? So let's go ahead and try to get some of these other pieces of LA. So what I'm doing is I'm holding Command, or would be Control, on a PC. So as we go through and kind of goal seek into our territory here, we got 1219 here. We can add that to another group. You can see we're going to get a lot of sales territories out of LA. Now, depending on how picky you are, this is a little bit of a situation where we have non-contiguous territory. We could go back, we could kind of undo And we can try to fix that and sort of gerrymander contiguous territory out of this. In this case, we have sort of, would we prefer a little more balance or a little more geographic continuity? I would argue in today's world, the geographic continuity piece isn't really such a big deal anymore, but here's one that maybe looks a little bit better. Right. So here we go. We've got, now if we go back here, we look at our west balance tracking, we got 3 and we got 9 left. Let's say we'll do another one down here and then we'll, yeah, nice, 12 and 15, great. And then we'll kind of continue on, right? So there we go. So now we'll kind of start getting ready to be about the point where we want to hit fast forward for the sake of everybody's time here and start moving into a little faster version. All right, so now we got our 12 territories all created here. So here's how I would just kind of go ahead and clean up and package this and then get ready to sort of send it out for further discussion, right? And going through these territories as I was building them, if I was going to go back to the start, you know, this took me about 15 minutes after I paused recording. If I was going to go back and do this, you know, like a real world kind of job scenario, I'd probably go back and I would go and create more clusters per territory because I found the clusters were a little bit large to work with, and it ended up with a distribution in a couple spots that I didn't love, like a little slightly suboptimal. We'll put it that way. You know, for the sakes of a demo, it's fine, but I would probably go back and I would probably increase the number of clusters per territory by, you know, probably another 20 or 30% from what I originally input. So here's what I'd do if I wanted to go ahead and just kind of, again, put this out here. So I'd put a reference band in here to the whole table. And what I would do is I'd create parameters territory min, and that would be our, it was 1160 in there. And then we'd have the other end of the band as territory max. You know, Tableau, a ton of different ways you could do this, right? But like we don't really need a label here. That's fine. And then that fill can be kind of like, you know, maybe greenish because it's maybe a darker greenish. So now like, oh, okay, cool. We can all see we're in the green. Great. Awesome. Right. Now, if I wanted to get a little bit even kind of more extra on it, what I would do is I would create a field, you know, where I tracked like territory good. Let's say, you know, if sum of index is less than or equal to my territory max, and sum index is greater than or equal territory min, good, else bad. You know, and I would obviously, you know, probably give it a different title that made didn't seem super weird probably to the business leaders I was going to send it out to, but you know, it's a good way we can kind of color code that and we can say, hey, everything's good, great. Right. Again, we're going to tidy this up a little bit more, but here's what we go. Now that we got our West Territory piece back here, what we'll want to do here is then we can take off that other filter in here. So the other is because I didn't allocate Alaska and Hawaii. In this case, they got 0 index. Right, so I can go ahead and I can see, we'll pretend we're not allocating Alaska and Hawaii. Sorry, people of Alaska and Hawaii. So we can go ahead and if we want to take out the state detail here, right, we can go ahead and add in that cluster name group. And that's going to give us a nice little visual once we compute our layout of all of our sales territories. There we go. And after that little fast forward, here we are. We can see all the territories. We probably take off that piece, and then we'll add our cluster name group for the label. And now we're probably going to want to add a little catchier label than that. So here's what I will do is I'll go in and I'll edit that group, and we'll just rename them. We'll call this West. Say we'll pretend we're in the S&P space. West S&P 1, 2, 3, and so on. All right, so now that we've got that piece done, now this gives us a nice look here. So then we could kind of go ahead and, I won't go deep into the dashboard building part, but you can imagine how you might give your leadership a nice view that would be ideally substantially larger than this of the West. And then we would go ahead and we'd have some other pieces here where we could kind of look over. We might want to add in a little bit of ability to use as a filter. So I could go ahead and look more closely at all my territories, and then we go ahead and dress it up here. And I'll link to some example dashboards on how you might do this. A few different ways that you could go through there, right? Now, if we fast forward, we pretend, hey, everybody's great. They love this territory. They just think it's, just love the whole territory model. That's great. So here's how we might package it up for export, right? Because again, this is going to depend a little bit on your CRM system and how you want to do this. But the way that I would think about doing it is we'll remove our others. Our others are in there because they're in the different areas as well. Right, so we've got our territory here, our postal code, our state, our cluster name. If we want to go ahead and grab that index with it, we can. We want this as a crosstab though. And my quick fix on this is if we just put the most detail on the left, then we avoid all the other pieces in there. And then we can kind of go ahead and get that ready to export out. Right now we've got our postal code mapping piece already ready for our CRM. Right, and we go ahead and add stuff across there as necessary. So that's sort of a quick, I don't know how long this video is going to end up being, probably a 10 to 15 minute intro on how we do that in Tableau using the web app. We do it pretty quickly. Real life time here was probably about 35 minutes for me with recording and everything else. So pretty quick, right? And definitely something that's going to help improve your process flow pretty substantially. So I look forward to another video coming soon, just around kind of building those valuation models for the postal codes and how you might generate that actual index score. Again, yeah, this is Hunter Barcelo with Northwest Data Strategy. I hope you've enjoyed this. Looking forward to producing some more content like this for our channel. Feel free to reach out if you'd like any help. You want to talk about anything in your kind of sales operations, revenue intelligence world. And have a great day.